welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and today we are going to be talking about gun violence prevention, segment 2. And joining me in the first part of the show is Lori Haas, who's the state director of the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. Thank you so much for being here, Lori.
Thank you for having me, Catherine.
So let's talk about the impact of the recent elections on how this legislative session might be different from the last 10, where you have spent most of your waking hours in the state capitol.
You know, with an increase in the number of Democrats in the House, the committee structure will change drastically. If the Democrats are in control of the House by an increase in the number of seats, or if they're in a power sharing arrangement, the committee structure will change drastically. We have a lot of good bills that what we call on offense, that are policies that we feel will save lives and mitigate and reduce gun violence. Those bills are directed by the Speaker. This last many years that I've been doing this work, Speaker Howe, he sends those to House Militia, Police, and Public Safety Subcommittee 1. That subcommittee is made up of 4 Republicans, all white men from rural parts of Virginia, and they vote no on every single bill. It doesn't matter how consequential it is or isn't, they vote no repeatedly. No to background checks, no to one handgun a month, no and allowing domestic abusers to keep their firearms. They vote no to child access laws, and we just don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense, and they don't have a perspective on constituencies outside of their own, what it's like in Richmond, what it's like in other parts of the Commonwealth, what it's like across Hampton Roads. We know that committee structure is going to change. We're going to have a lot better representation. The hope is either a majority or 50-50, and we suspect we're going to get some good gun bills passed and through the House.
But so help our viewers to understand too is that if you're not really in tune with the legislative process, the committee structure matters. Yes. Who's assigned to the committee and who assigns who's on these committees, because often they are killed in a subcommittee. They yes. never even see a full committee, and they certainly never make it to the floor for a vote.
Yeah, with the surge in political activism, civic activism after the November 16 elections, a lot of people were saying, well, why haven't we had redistricting? Why haven't we had, immigration reform? Why haven't we had this reform? Why haven't we had better gun laws? And they just think nobody's doing anything. Well, that's not true. The Speaker sends bills to subcommittees that he wants to go away and he wants them to die, and they do. They are passed by or left on the table, and they never see the light of day. They don't make it from the subcommittee in the House to the full committee in the House, and then they don't make it to the floor. The Senate goes from full committee to the floor. So if a vote on a bill is, and the bill doesn't pass in the subcommittee or the committee, it never gets to the floor for a vote. And you might have a representative who never even sees a bill, doesn't take a vote on it.
And the issue with gerrymandering too has meant that we have up to this year had 66 Republicans in the House of Delegates, yes. even though in the main the number of Democratic votes and the number of Republican votes across the state is almost 50-50.
It's actually higher. In the 2007 recent elections, 54% of the votes were for Democrats, across the board. So it's a higher number. We're very blue these days. At a minimum, we're 50-50. And, the reality is we need to have Democrats in control, or at least power sharing, so that these committees are populated by people, so that the committees are frankly competitive. You have 2 sides, you have a bill in front of you, both sides look at each other and say, we want to keep constituents happy, we want to move Virginia forward, what can we do? Can we iron out a compromise? When you have these gerrymandered districts and persons in particular on the right, they're not competitive. They're not trying to represent both sides of any issue. They're more fearful of a primary from the right than they are of anything, because if they win the nomination, they win the seat, hands down. They don't really have to do anything.
That's true, especially in Southwest Virginia and the rural areas, because there's now 3 Democrats down there. There's Sam Rasool, and now there's Chris Hurst, and then there's John Edwards, and that's like west of Harrisonburg.
Yeah.
And the rest are solidly red Republican districts.
Yes, and even those are all gerrymandered. Roanoke is in some, carved out.
They've packed the Democrats.
And that's not representative government either. And we know that across the Commonwealth, the trend is progressive, the trend is Democratic, and we want to get some work done. And we're not beyond or disapproving of compromise. We get that that's the way government has worked and has worked for generations. It's only in the last decade plus where we saw gerrymandering happening across the country, not just in the Commonwealth. Despite the fact that Virginia is easily blue or 50-50 at a minimum, we only have 4 Democrats and we have now 7 Republicans. That's not 50-50.
That is not.
And our Congress looks that way. No wonder nothing gets done. And it's understandable in the Virginia legislature, when there is not representation from the voters, when elected officials are picking their voters and not voters picking their elected officials, not much can get done.
So you will be down there on January the 10th, which is when session starts.
Yes.
And we may or may not have some of these races resolved. One hopes that we will, but there are 3 that are still up in the air, and the one in Fredericksburg in the 88th, which actually is the replacement for Speaker Howe's seat, is the one that might really take the longest to resolve.
Yeah, there's, Virginia has policy and code sections on how you address recounts and how you address certification and those sorts of things. What happened in the 28th and the neighboring district, the 88th, has been unseen before. It's not happened before, and it is likely going to take a court case or maybe possibly a series of court cases to resolve and determine how do you address the disenfranchisement that happened. There are voters who were given the wrong ballot, and they need their vote to count, and they need it to count in the district which by the person who's going to represent them. They need to vote in their district. So that's beyond my
I think all of
my
us
job description, but I suspect we'll see a very thorough process, and hopefully lawyers and judges involved in that will do the right thing, and I suspect they will. There are 2 other districts, the 40th and the 94th, where the count was so close that there's likely going to be a recount, and we should have, by the time this airs, probably the results of those, and we'll know who the winner is.
Well, hopefully so. Mm-hmm. But you'll go to work regardless on January 10th, and you'll be down there pretty much every day until the session is over, which is March 10th. Yes. It's a 60-day year this year.
Yeah. As the state director for the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, I'm in the building to represent the interest of the citizens of the Commonwealth. Overwhelmingly, for many years now, in poll after poll after poll, the percentages of people who want regulations and gun safety policies, 1 handgun a month, universal background checks, a ban or a limitation on assault weapons, child access, improvement on, the rules around child access, domestic violence,
that really came to light after this most recent church shooting. The fact that he had been found guilty by the military, that was not entered anywhere. The fact that it was domestic violence, that was not entered anywhere. It was like a breakdown of an existing system.
Yes. Persons who commit violence, domestic violence and other types of violence, are at the greatest risk of committing future violence. And when we arm them, that future violence is often lethal and then escalates out of control, like we saw in Texas or we saw in Las Vegas and other places. So it is a good predictor. It is something that needs to be addressed. And when people exhibit bad behavior, dangerous behavior, violent behavior, why are we continuing to arm them? And we've had a bill in the Virginia General Assembly. The House Republicans have not let that bill see the light of day. We think that persons who've been convicted of domestic abuse and domestic violence shouldn't have firearms. They just shouldn't.
So is this a war of messaging to a certain extent? Because, the take away my guns, you're coming to take away my guns. We saw this under Obama, that people truly believed that, you know, the federal government was going to come and take away their guns.
Well, as long as we have a Second Amendment and a Supreme Court, I believe that, you know, we can't come take your guns away if you're a law-abiding citizen and you've not broken any laws. That doesn't mean we can't use regulation to the advantage of the safety of our citizens. We regulate every manner of consumer product in the United States and across the Commonwealth. You know, these are deadly and lethal weapons. There is nothing in the Second Amendment that says we can't regulate them. There is, it says well regulated.
Well, you know, and the analogy I use is both about cigarettes and car safety, and because I consider this a public health issue, and people are just not looking at this. If a germ was killing 32,000 people in this country every single year for over a decade, we'd be trying to find a cure for the thing that's a preventable cause of death, right? But that's not how we're looking at this. But cigarettes, we limit where they can be smoked, to whom they can be sold. We tax them, and with car safety, airbags, we have driver's licenses, car insurance, safety inspections.
Speed limits.
Right.
I mean, you know, the other side and the gun lobby loves to say, well, you can't regulate, criminals will still commit violence. Well, yeah, but the argument could be, well, people are still going to break the law, they're still going to speed, why have speed limits? That's just a no-brainer. And as I looked at one legislator in the eye, and he says, well, passing laws isn't going to help, then I said, then why are you here? You're passing laws day in and day out.
That's an amazing thing to say.
You know, passing laws aren't going to help. And I said, then why you're here? Go home. You know, this is your job. You know, this is the avenue that we have as citizens, is to expect those who are elected to protect us to do their job. And I think we're going to see some progress in 2018, some real progress. People are tired of hearing about the everyday shootings that happen in our neighborhoods, our communities, our friends, our neighbors, and we're tired of the mass shootings. So we need to do something about it.
Where can people find information about these bills during session? Is there a website? Is somebody tracking these?
Oh yes, we track all of these bills. We, in the short session, which are the odd years, we see about 90 gun bills. In the even years, when it's a longer session, we've seen as many as 120 plus gun bills. I work for the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, and you can go to our website and sign up to learn more about this. And I will say, depending upon, you know, your availability, on Martin Luther King holiday, we have a gun violence prevention vigil and lobby day. It happens annually on MLK Day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You don't have to RSVP. Please just show up, bring your children, your grandchildren, your neighbors, your friends. It is the largest event and gathering on the Capitol grounds in Virginia, in Richmond, and has been for a number of years. So we'd love to have as many people join us on MLK Day as possible.
Well, thank you so much, Lori. I appreciate that information, and I know our viewers do too. Join us in the second segment. We'll be talking with Julie Keller.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
So I've come up with the family emergency plan.
Great. What is it?
It's difficult to talk about, so I'm not telling you.
How will we know what to do?
You won't.
I'm so glad I won't have to remember anything.
And me too. Thanks for this, sweetie.
Talk to your kids about who to call, where to meet, what to pack. Visit ready.gov/kids for tips and information.
Most party fouls? Not a big deal. But if you decide to drink and drive underage, you could lose your license and your freedom. Underage drinking and driving. The ultimate party foul.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. Joining me in this segment is Julie Keller of the Northern Virginia chapter of the Brady campaign. Thank you so much for being here, Julie.
Thanks for having me, Catherine.
So let's talk a little bit about, what you see are the main hurdles still to trying to get us across the finish line for common sense gun legislation.
Well, the frustrating thing is that the vast majority of Americans, and you just don't see this kind of agreement on any other issue. The vast majority, over 90% of Americans across all political persuasions are in favor of background checks. A good 70-some% are in favor of other background or other measures. Even 68% of Americans are in favor of a renewal assault weapon ban. Why isn't happening? Why are 95% of delegates not voting? Why are 95% of U.S. Congressmen not voting? It is a very complicated question. I blame the NRA. Everybody blames the NRA, but the NRA is an incredibly effective lobby at selling more guns. That's their only purpose, is to sell more guns. If you sell a gun to a criminal, if you sell a gun to somebody who's likely to commit suicide, there's no limit.
So is this a war of messaging? I mean, and I asked Lori the same thing. It's kind of like, why do people automatically go to, you're trying to take my guns away? Like, that's not the case. It's never been the case. But are we on our side of this issue? Do we just not have a compelling enough message? Because the thing that shocked me, and it will forever shock me, after these mass shootings, gun sales go up. After Las Vegas, gun sales went up. They shot up. I'm like, how is that a response to a mass shooting?
This is how incredibly effective the NRA is. They will tell women that they're safer with a gun when the statistics are very clear that a woman who has a gun in the house is about 5 times as likely to die as a result of that gun rather than be protected by it. They will tell you that only a good guy with a gun can stop a bad guy with a gun. Well, you know how many times a good guy with a gun stopped a mass shooting other than a professional? It doesn't happen.
Exactly. This debate came up about after the most recent church shooting. People lobbying for people should just come to church armed. I'm like, this makes just zero sense.
It really does. It really does. And I know at the Virginia Tech shooting in which Lori's daughter was shot, a lot of the people that were in that room said that they wouldn't have known who to shoot at. If they're if somebody started shooting, then they're gonna shoot at the good guy with the gun. It turns out they all look alike. Those guns all look alike, whether they're held by a good or a bad
professionals,
guy.
Policemen, don't always get it right. Being in the moment, I heard a radio interview about the same thing, that you would have to have a high level of training to be able to respond in an instant, even if you had a gun.
Absolutely.
And to be effective.
I think that police say that they get their target about 40% of the time, something like that.
And that's like a target that's stationary, not somebody with, who's charging down a movie aisle with a semi-automatic weapon.
In the dark.
Right.
Exactly.
So some of this is just not logical.
And
it just doesn't make sense.
In Virginia, to get a concealed carry permit, guess what? You don't need any range training. You can get that permit without knowing how to shoot a gun. What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? I mean,
and I want to get back to this. People can have guns if they want. I know the Second Amendment is here to stay. We're not trying to take all guns away from all people, but we want people to understand what the risks are. We want the message to be there that if you feel safer with the gun, that's great. Lock it up. Store the bullets somewhere else. If you have children in the house, make sure the gun is locked up. I think everybody agrees that somebody who is dangerously mentally ill enough that a judge declares them to be mentally ill should not have a gun. We just have to get on our message. You mentioned that before about the messaging. We have such a hard time with that.
We do.
It always goes back to that. Why are you trying to take my guns? And I say, if you're not a convicted felon, if you're not a child, a domestic abuser, if you
aren't a 3-year-old toddler.
Aren't a toddler, right.
If you aren't a toddler.
Actually, though, I'll tell you, I was once in the the hearings in the General Assembly where they were trying to decide what bills to hear. And one of the senators, I think it was Senator Abbott, proposed a bill that said that a child under 4 should not be allowed to handle a gun. And it was killed.
It was killed. I remember that bill. It was
yeah.
ridiculous. It's like, you've got to be kidding me.
Right, right. And the NRA lobbyist stands up and she says, we believe that parents should have the right to decide when their children handle guns.
It's pretty
Right?
crazy, especially when they're shooting the neighbor's children or members of their family or their
your
siblings.
other children.
Right?
Exactly.
So let's talk about technology, because one of the other things that's rarely mentioned is technology exists so that guns can be fitted with a device where only the person whose fingerprint, it's kind of like the fingerprint on your iPhone, right? Your thumbprint unlocks your iPhone.
Yep.
And there's a technology that would prevent guns from being fired except from the person who owns that gun.
Yep, it's
but
called
there's
smart guns.
Smart guns.
And even that has had resistance.
Huge backlash,
because
huge.
I think the first, there was a study, the first guy in, I think it might have been in Las Vegas, who tried to sell that technology. He got death threats from the other gun.
He did. He had to like stop carrying that weapon.
Right. I mean,
or offering that.
It's bizarre. The other thing that smart gun technology is great for is preventing suicides. I mean, how often do you hear that tragic story where the, teenager goes into
Right.
dad's closet and gets the gun and kills himself?
The Dead Poets Society. I don't know if you remember that movie when he goes into his dad's study and opens the drawer with the loaded
Stays
handgun.
with you forever, doesn't it?
It does, right? Smart gun technology would have prevented that from happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So-
Yeah.
so these are
and you
things-
can, you sell more guns when you have smart guns, because then you want to replace your gun with a smart gun.
And we've lost track of guns too. We've simply lost track of guns. I mean, guns are stolen, and that's the other thing we don't talk about, is
Right.
that when there's a break, somebody breaks into your car or somebody breaks into your house and they steal your guns, they kind of disappear.
Yeah, and you don't have to report it. And of course, there's no registry. So when they do a background check, I think it's either 24 or 48 hours. They have to destroy the record of the background check. So we don't know where the guns are. It's the Wild West. It's just absurd.
It really is. And as you said, all these guns out there, we don't know who has them. We don't know how many guns. I mean, with the shooting in Las Vegas, the number of guns this man owned, and the issues like bump stocks. Who even knew about this?
Right.
And now we're fighting over whether they should be outlawed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's absurd. And unfortunately, what happens when something as horrific as Las Vegas happens with a bump stock, then everybody thinks, well, just as soon as we get rid of bump stocks, we won't have this problem anymore. And of course it won't. I call it necessary but not sufficient.
Oh, I agree. But the very fact that we can't even get that, these shootings happen, and people are floored and shocked, and the country grieves, and then suddenly we're on to the next shooting, or it's next week.
Well, you know what? We talked last time about not politicizing a tragedy and give people time to grieve. In this country, you may not believe this, there is a mass shooting every day of the year. Unfortunately, it's usually domestic. It's usually a guy gets mad at his wife and gets drunk and takes his gun and shoots his 3 children and her and himself, and that's a mass shooting. But if we waited till tomorrow to talk about every mass shooting, it would be tomorrow and there would be another mass shooting. It needs to be talked about now.
And I always go back to the 32, and it's been pretty steady that it's been around or above 32,000 deaths a year from guns in this country, but for over a decade. Add that up. That's more than veterans that were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan.
I think it's all of the wars of the 20th century together. And we were talking about Sandy Hook last time. 500,000 people have been shot in America since then. 500,000. Yes. And about 150 of them have died. That's a pretty big problem.
Yeah, that's 500,000 people.
Yes.
That's 500,000 people.
Yes.
And we don't see it as a public health crisis. And that floors me too.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And anything that kills 500,000 people is pandemic.
It's a problem. It's an epidemic. It really is. And isn't it interesting too? the number of guns that have been lost and stolen in the D.C. area since 2011. I think that number is like, I don't even know.
Yeah, and another thing about our area, I'm going on a different train of thought. Virginia is kind of infamous for being an iron pipeline because it's so easy to buy a gun here.
Yes.
That people buy guns here and they run
Transport
them to
them.
New York. Yeah,
They
isn't
transport
that
them.
something to be proud of?
Yep. And again, I feel like lax gun laws has made Virginia a source of too many guns that are illegally obtained and used in crimes throughout the rest of the country.
And before, I guess 4 years ago, we had a 1 gun a month law, and
yes,
and that
to try to stem that,
right,
for people who are buying them specifically to resell them or to take them out of state.
Exactly. You know, people always use the example. Chicago, Illinois has such tough gun laws, but why do they have such a bad crime problem? Because right across the border is Indiana, and you can buy 100 guns at a time.
Yeah,
and
I
run
saw
them.
a graphic on that.
Yeah.
She actually showing, visuals really help people to understand the enormity of the problem in a way that just statistics don't. And I mean, and then we do talk about statistics, and I have to believe that if mass shootings or the shooting in your town or in your neighborhood or in your church is not enough to convince you, I'm not sure from a messaging perspective what else we can do to convince the public, or in this case Virginians, that they have got to stand up, speak up, and demand that this be changed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's what you do. You vote, and we did that. We did it. We did a good job. We got things changed. And then you call your representatives. They work for you, and you call them and you tell them, I want some sensible gun legislation. You go to Lobby Day on Martin Luther King weekend, and you go and you visit your legislators. Living in Northern Virginia, I go to Capitol Hill all the time and talk to our federal representatives. They work for us, and they need to know that this is not a losing issue anymore. You can, all 3 of our executives that we just elected in Virginia are all pro-sensible gun legislation, and they all won. So,
and they ran on that too.
And they ran on it.
And they did not shy away from that.
Which is really something quite new.
Well, thank you so much, Julie, for being here. I so appreciate you kind of enlightening us. And for our viewers at home, this is what you need to know.